Babul Eidain, and off you go, Hassan. So, Bismillah, we're going to now be learning about the Eid prayer and the rules regarding the Eid day, the dhikr, the remembrances of Allah, the ghusl, the sunnahs, and etiquettes, inshallah ta'ala.
Eid prayer. The prayer of both Eids is wajib upon any person who is obliged to perform the Friday assembly prayer. The conditions for the Eid prayer are the same as the Friday prayer with the exception of the sermon, for the Eid prayer is valid without the sermon, though it is a minor offense to omit it.
Yeah, so the conditions of Juma, as mentioned in the Bible Juma, are that Juma is an obligation on free, so not slaves, free men, not women, who are baligh or aqil, have intellect, and have the ability to go to Juma, so they can walk, they're not ill, so free of illnesses or things like this. That person who fulfills those criteria will have to perform the Jumu'ah prayer. Okay, that's a fard. For the Eid prayer, the same conditions. You have to be baligh, you have to be Muslim, aqil, male, free, not a slave, and have the ability to go and from your home to the Eid on your own by yourself. By the way, so you could somebody could help you there or drive you there. No, the ruling is, can you go by yourself? If you can, you got to go by yourself, or even if you go by with somebody else, you have to pray that prayer. If you can't go by yourself due to illnesses or conditions, then yeah, don't have to be taken there by anybody else. Then that person will have to perform the Eid prayer as well. We're not talking about the Eid prayer itself now, we're talking about who has to pray Eid. The conditions of Eid itself are the conditions of Juma, which are things like the authority of the Sultan, open to the public, an imam, appointed imam, which is part of the authority of Sultan. In a city, you can't do Jumas and Eid prayers in villages or remote areas. This was never done by the Prophet, the Sahaba, or the early Muslims. They only established Juma and Eid in the main cities and one large congregation as well. Now we have smaller congregations, but a city is where things are established, not little places just for the sake of it. You just don't do Eid there, you don't do Juma there, you do Friday, you just do Zohar on Fridays, that's it. And so the same conditions apply. However, there's a condition for Juma that you do a khutbah before. There's no condition of doing a khutbah for Eid. You do the Eid prayer without a khutbah, and the khutbah is done after Eid, not before. And as it says, it is disliked or it's offensive to not do the khutbah or to put the khutbah first, because it's not first. The Eid prayer is first and then the khutbah. In Juma, the khutbah is first, the sermon, and then the prayer. So for Eid, we do the prayer. So literally, you just go and pray. Yes, but obviously they build it up. They make announcements. They tell you they're going to pray. They have some, remembrance of Allah, some reminders. Then they say we're going to pray, and they pray. But literally, you just pray, and then after the prayer, they do the khutbah, a speech, a reminder, teach you about the udhiyah, the qurbani, right, and these kind of things. And then you meet each other, you celebrate Eid, etc. After the khutbah is finished, inshallah ta'ala. So what do we do on this day? So that's the ruling of praying the Eid prayer. We're going to go discuss the Eid prayer shortly. But before we get to the Eid prayer, what do we do in the morning? What do we do on this auspicious day? There's two Eids. Eid al-Fitr, sometimes we call it small Eid, which is the first of Shawwal, which is after Ramadan. And we have Eid al-Adha, which is what we call the big Eid, which is the Eid of the sacrifice, where we do the qurbani or the udhiyah. So these are the two Eids. They're slightly different in their rulings, not massively. Let's have a read and find out what to do and what the differences are.
Recommendations of Eid al-Fitr. It is recommended to eat an odd number of dates before going to the mosque.
Yeah.
Do you want me to just go through these?
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing really to explain. It's just good to know these things. Unless there's something to explain, we'll go over it. Bismillah.
Recommended to eat odd number of dates before going to the mosque. Recommended to perform the purification bath, brush the teeth, and use perfume, and to wear the best clothes one has. It is recommended for a person who is required to pay the Sadaqah al-Fitr to give it before the prayer. Recommended for one to exhibit and display happiness and joy. Recommended to give extra Sadaqah depending on one's capacity. Recommended to be awake early. Recommended to arrive early at the place of prayer. It is recommended to perform the dawn prayer in the local mosque in order to fulfill his right, and then proceed towards the area of the Eid prayer, walking and uttering the takbir silently. And upon reaching the destination of prayer, one is to stop uttering the takbir according to one narration, though according to another narration, one is to cease the takbir when the Eid prayer begins.
Yep.
Uh, One is to return from the mosque via a different road. It is
Yep. Okay. So yeah, this was before. Sorry, what is disliked?
disliked to offer voluntary prayer at the prayer site of Eid prior to the Eid prayer, and it is disliked at home before the Eid prayer.
Yeah.
Uh, it is
One
disliked
more.
to offer voluntary prayer at the prayer site of the Eid prayer, and this is the preferred view according to the majority of scholars.
Right. Okay. So brilliant. So we've gone to some makruhat as well. So when you say mustahab, which is recommended, a lot of those are sunnahs. The Prophet would ghusl, he used the miswak, to apply the best of one's clothes. So you don't have to have new clothes. The idea is to have the best, nice, good-looking clothes, special occasion type clothes. Look nice for the day. Different level of design and formality as you prefer, but look nice for the day. It said here that it's recommended to perform your sadaqat fitr, which is wajib. So how can something be wajib that's recommended, or recommended that's wajib? What it means is one of the best times to give the zakat fitr is before the prayer. You have to give it. It's wajib to give it before then, even if you can. But if the last point is before the Eid prayer, after Eid prayer is sinful and you're wrong into delaying it so long. But obviously, this was in a day and age where there'd be poor people around, and the community has a very level of, um, you know, uh, poverty and wealth, etc. Now, you probably wouldn't find somebody to give sadaqat al-fitr to directly. It might be somebody available, it might not be, who knows. So it's better to give your sadaqat al-fitr prior to going to the Eid prayer by a long time. So in Ramadan, basically, make sure you get that to some poor people or to a charity to some poor people, etc. And generally give sadaqah, etc. And all the other things were straightforward. Doing the takbir, we're going to talk about the takbir for Big Eid as well, which is important. But the takbir is Allahu Akbar, La ilaha illallah, Wallahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, wa lillahi alhamd. You recite that not loudly. On small Eid, you do it to yourselves without too much loudness. And you keep reciting it until you reach the place of prayer, which is now the masjid. And then you stop and you come back a different way. In terms of nafil prayers on Eid day, you read Fajr at your local masjid, you come home, you don't read no nafil at home. So there's no nafil between your own prayer, your Eid prayer, and your Fajr prayer and your Eid prayer. That time of getting ready and time with the family before you go. And when you arrive at the musalla, no prayers are done there. You don't pray nafil when you arrive in the masjid or anything. You sit down, you listen to the imam, or you pray the prayer of Eid. And then after Eid, you meet people, you do khutbah first, you meet people, you don't, spend time praying at the masjid or the musalla, which is the place of prayer, because you're done outside in the open in many occasions. You don't pray there before or after. You can pray when you get back home. That's the time you can start praying nafil on the day of Eid. Prior to that, you really should be, the idea is not to disappear and be this, so pious that you're praying. No, the idea here is the Sunnah of the Prophet is that you spend time with people at this day, right? You interact. Imagine after the masjid, after the Eid prayer at the masjid or the musalla, you're seeing people for the first time in a year sometimes, right? For several months, because this Eid, everybody comes to the masjid, everybody takes the day off, right? They're there. And you're like, yeah, forget these guys. I'm going to go and pray 2 rakats, 4 rakats. Like, people are like, we're meeting each other the first time. On this occasion, it's better and more rewarding to go and meet the people than to pray. Believe it or not, yes, there's a time for everything, and now is not a time for you to show your piety and extra rakats and no. You come another day for that. Go home and do that. But right now, you've seen people. It's Eid, it's celebration, it's community, it's socializing. Do that right now. Go and meet each other, give salams, and so forth, and show a happy face, etc. So yeah, it's disliked to involve yourself in salah at the musalla at the masjid on the day of Eid, other than the Eid salah itself. After that point, if you come for other prayers and other times of the day, you should go to the masjid and pray nafil, and at home pray nafil. I'm not saying you don't pray nafil on this day. It's just at that time, at the Eid prayer, before and after, it is not recommended to do nafil prayers. It is better to meet the people and fulfill the rights of your community, and so forth, inshallah ta'ala. So, moving on to the time of the Eid prayer.
Time of the Eid prayer. The valid time to perform the Eid prayer is when the sun has risen above the horizon, the height of a spear's length or two, and ends just prior to noon.
Yeah. So, when is the time for Eid prayer? The time after Fajr, or after the sun has risen to some length, irtifa' shams, like a spear, meaning it's quite high in the sky. An hour after is fine, plenty. Even half an hour probably is fine, but an hour to keep it safe. So if the sunrise is 5:15, 5:15 a.m., 5:30 a.m., then 6:30 a.m. is fine. You can start praying Eid at that time. And then it goes all the way until Zawal. Zawal meaning the sun zenith, or just before Zawal, which is the sun zenith, which will probably be around 1 o'clock, 1 p.m. So anytime. So sometimes the Jamaat, they announce the masjid 8:30, 9:30, 10 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 9:40. It can be any time. And of course, in our day and age, practically speaking, we don't have the ability to gather during the coronavirus as well in one massive gathering. So the more we break it up is easier in general, even outside of coronavirus, and of course during coronavirus, the more we can break it up into smaller congregations. So often, masajid have now advertised 4 or 5 congregations, because you can start at 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Yeah, you can pray at these times, not a problem, because after sunrise up until the zenith, you go all the, obviously the later you get, probably more odd it becomes, because it is recommended to do it earlier than later. Yes. Delaying it is obviously delaying it into the whole day of Eid. You want to get the prayer done and celebrate, obviously, for the rest of the day. But yeah, you have all this time to perform the Eid prayer. Normally, it was one Eid prayer, and there was no multiple Eid prayers at all. It was one, and that was it. The whole city did one Eid prayer, one massive Eid prayer. Now, of course, we've got many masajid, and in the masajid, due to the lack of accommodation, and of course, the coronavirus rulings right now, for those watching, we're in COVID-19 2020. It started in 2019. That's why it's called COVID-19. I've been told it started back then. So they knew about it, and they got widespread in 2020, and we're on lockdown, and we're coming out slowly. There's still local lockdowns and whatnot going on, and be careful. So, in advice wise, same question again: do we have to go pray Eid? You said it's wajib on the person that's pray Juma. Juma started now. Do we have to go pray Eid now, etc.? The answer remains the same as just before the lockdown. Even before the lockdown came, the guideline came out that Juma is not suspended. You can pray Juma, but is it required for everyone to go? Well, if you fear the danger of the virus, if you fear that there could be a second wave, etc., and of course, due to this massive restrictions as they are, you probably can't get in. You can get in, but you got to, obviously book, etc. It's not really open fully. Then right now, it's good to go. I don't want to discourage people from going to the masjid. That's the last thing I want to do. We need to go to the masjid right now. We've been so far. We're generally away from the masjid now. As we felt this lockdown has really changed our way we think, more or less, and the way we feel. We need to go to the masjid. Generally for prayers and specifically for Juma and Eid. But I wouldn't say it's sinful not to go right now as well, or you've not fulfilled an obligation. However, I would say you should try to go, and you should get into the whole idea of taking your children and so forth. You don't want to become dormant in this sense. Like, we don't do anything. Right? You just pray at home by yourself, and that's not Islam. Islam has a social aspect to it, and we need to practice that, but wisely and carefully. I mean, look right now, myself, Hassan, just before we were talking about, before the class, we were talking about Hajj. We were both planning on going Hajj together, and mashallah, we would have been today in Mina together, doing Hajj, and we are both saying how sad we are, and how we just feel that, look at that. It's the decree of Allah, is what Allah planned. And look, the Hajj is taking place, but very limited numbers. We've seen some of the pictures today, and so forth, of what's happening. So that's life. We have to go by those guidelines and put safety first, and human life, and so forth. So within all of that, I don't want to discourage you. I don't want to say don't, because we should, and we should really be getting together. It's a communal thing. Hajj is not about one person or yourself. It's about the ummah. And the prayer is not about yourself, the congregation prayer is about the community, and Eid is about the community. So we can't just stay at home as well. So it's one of those catch-22 sometimes, where there's still problems or still restrictions and conditions and so forth, and there's still a desire and a requirement to some degree Islamically to go out there and get involved. So we just got to be careful, and hopefully we can all make the most of these special days. We're still in the Hijjah. Don't forget to fast on the 9th of the Hijjah. 2 years reward. Sahih Muslim, the Prophet said the fast of the Hijjah compensates for the previous year and the following year. Your sins are forgiven. These shortcomings are removed. It's a blessed day to fast. So please do fast on the 9th of the Hijjah, inshallah ta'ala. Moving on now to the actual Eid prayer itself. So we know the time of Eid prayer from the sun becoming slightly high in the sky to all the way up till before Zuhr, several hours. How do you pray Eid? Bismillah.
To perform the Eid prayer. One is to intend the prayer of Eid. Then the opening Allahu Akbar is given, after which the Imam and the follower recite the opening glorification.
Yeah.
The additional takbeers are then performed by the Imam and the followers, and there are 3 takbeers for which the hands are raised for each one of them. After this, the Imam is to seek refuge with Allah from Satan, the accursed, for recitation, and then silently say, in the name of Allah, most merciful, most graceful. He then recites a Fatiha along with another surah, preferably being Sabbih Ismi Rabbikal A'la, reciting the whole surah. Following this, he is to proceed into the bowing posture.
Yeah, okay, that's good. So that's the first rakat done, okay? So Eid prayer is like any normal 2 rakat prayer, guys, okay? Just praying 2 rakats Eid behind the Imam. It's a wajib prayer, Allahu Akbar, it's a congregational prayer. Now, there's just one major difference between normal 2 rakat prayer and Eid prayer, and that is the addition in Eid of 6 takbirat. 6 times you're going to say Allahu Akbar in the prayer as part of the prayer, which are not done in any other prayer, to be honest, other than the 2 days of Eid, the 2 Eid prayers. As you just saw there, you start the prayer, you read Subhanakallahumma bihamdika, the thana, and then you do 3 takbeers. So there's 3 takbeers in each rakat. In the first rakat, you recite them after wala ilaha ghayruk, wa ta'ala jadduka, wala ilaha ghayruk. The Imam will say, so you follow the Imam, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. You don't see takbeers. The Imam then says, A'udhu Billah, Bismillah, Alhamdulillah, Rabbil Alameen, Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, Fatiha, Surah. It could be any surah. Sunnah recommendation is Sabbih Isma Rabbikal A'la, Alladhi Khalaqa Fasawwa. And you do the remainder of that rakat, ruku, sujood, etc. as normal. Okay, so the only thing you've done is you've inserted an additional 3 Allahu Akbars between the thana, which is Subhanakallahumma bihamdika, and the A'udhu Billahi Minash Shaitanir Rajeem, right? So in between that time, the Imam will do 3 takbeers. You follow the Imam and you do the 3 takbeers as well. It doesn't mention it here, but it does. The Imam does teach this on either day. He'll say, when you do these takbeers, leave your hands lowered. So Allahu Akbar, the first one. So you start with your hands on your chest, on your navel, and you say Allahu Akbar, and you release your hands. Say, release your hands, leave them to your side. Second takbir, Allahu Akbar, leave them to your side. Third takbir, Allahu Akbar, clasp them. He'll explain this, right? So on the third takbir, you'll clasp them. He'll read the Quran. He'll do a normal rakat. You follow him in the normal prayer until you stand for the second rakat. When you stand for the second, what happens, Hassan?
When the Imam rises for the second rak'ah, he is to begin with the Bismillah, then the Fatiha, followed by a surah. And it is recommended that surah be al-Ghashiyah.
Yep.
After this, the Imam and the people are to pronounce the additional takbeers 3 times, raising the hands for each one, as was done in the first rak'ah. And this method is superior to advancing the additional takbeers before the recitation.
Yep.
However, the Imam advances the additional takbeers in the second rak'ah before the recitation, it is permitted.
Yeah, okay, so what have you got there?
It's just one more sentence. And on completion of the prayer, the Imam is to conduct 2 sermons during which...
Yeah, leave the sermons. We'll talk about the sermons in a bit. Okay. So the second rakat, you stand, the Imam reads Fatiha, it is normal prayer, reads Surah, which is better to be Hal Ataka Hadith al-Ghashiyah, Wujuhun Yawma Idin Khashiyah, Surah al-Ghashiyah. Surah, this is Surah after Surah al-A'la, I believe, in the Quran. So those 2 are the Sunnah recitals mentioned in the Hadith. Prophet would recite those in Eid and in Juma as well, I believe, right? So it could be recited in Juma as well. And then after recitation of this surah, so you read the whole surah or any surah, the Imam will say Allahu Akbar. He's not going into ruku, he's doing the 3 takbeers of the second rakat. Remember, he said 3 takbeers extra in the first, 3 takbeers extra in the second. They're done at the end of the recitation, the second rakat. So he will then say Allahu Akbar. We'll say Allahu Akbar, raise our hands, put them down by their sides. Allahu Akbar, second one. Allahu Akbar. We've done our second one. Allahu Akbar, third takbeer. Allahu Akbar in third takbeer. In each takbir, you leave your hands by your side. On the fourth takbir, which is not the Eid takbir, the extra takbir, is the takbir of the ruku. He's going to say Allah Akbar and go into ruku. You follow the Imam into ruku, and then you complete your prayer with the ruku, with the sajda, with the tashahhud, with salam, and you have completed 2 rakats of Salat of Eid with 3 extra takbir in the first rakat, with 3 extra takbir in the second rakat. Yes, ladies can partake in the Eid Salah. They're not required to. So that's the conditions of Eid, or as we mentioned, for men. If they do go in this climate, I don't think anybody will be going from the lady folk. But in the past, if there is facilities for ladies at Eid prayers, or they are invited to take part at the separate sections, no problem at all. They did in the time of Prophet ﷺ, it was open, and it's a prayer, and they could take part in that as well. And they would pray in the same way in their section, etc. The thing to mention here is that it says here, which is not often taught, we don't learn this. I think Hassan might not have come across this. I don't know. That you can in the second rakat do the takbirs first. We don't do that. The way we practice it is as described there. We do the takbirs in the second rakat after Surah Al-Ghashiyah or after any surah of the Quran that we just described. But if the Imam was to get up for the second rakat and start with Allahu Akbar 3 times and then read Fatiha and the Quran and go into ruku and sujood, it says here, jaz, that is also allowed. The first method is better and was practiced. This method of putting the takbirat first is fine as well. It's like the first rakat. You start with takbirat, you do recitation, ruku, sujood. Second rakat, you start with the takbirat, recitation, ruku, sujood. It's allowed. I have in my lifetime been to a Juma, Eid prayer. It was in Syria when I was there in Damascus, where the Imam read the Eid prayer in this fashion. I was surprised, but it was his choice, of course. We actually asked him at the end, I was, Sheikh, why did you do the Eid takbirat first? Isn't it after at the end? He said, yes, it is, but it's allowed, as you know. And I decided to avoid any confusion. And sometimes people make mistakes in Eid prayer, just to do it like this for them, so that nobody's gonna get mixed up with the ruku and sujood or the takbir and the ruku, etc. If we do the takbir first, which is good actually, because obviously people may not know the rules of Eid and how to pray the Eid prayer. So if you make it in a way that's easy for them, which this probably is, to do the takbir first, nobody's gonna go into ruku when you stood up, like Allahu Akbar, then go back again. Everybody's gonna think what's going on. It's a takbir, Allahu Akbar 3 times, do your Quran, do your ruku and sujood. It's allowed, but it's not really practiced that much. And then, like Hassan said, the Imam does khutbah, and the same khutbah like Juma. He stands up, does khutbah, he sits down, and he stands up and does khutbah again. And in the khutbah, he talks about Sadaqat al-Fitr, making sure people have paid it. If they haven't, make sure you make it up. Make sure you do this every year to accept your fasting of Ramadan. He talks about the concept of Eid and joyousness and showing gratitude to Allah for completing a month of fasting, and to remember the Muslims and the communal affairs in our lives. Okay, question, Hassan. I just come to the masjid, I've come to pray Eid, they finished. There's no Eid prayer. What do I do? Read on, Hassan, let's find out.
What I was going to read that and pretend I had the answer.
Yeah, you're answering the question.
One cannot make up the prayer of Eid al-Fitr if it is missed in congregation with the Imam.
Yeah, so this is important, right? So there's no such thing as making up the Eid prayer. And this was something that I think was being talked about in Eid al-Fitr when we went through Ramadan. People saying, I'm going to pray Eid at home, I'm going to do this, or we can make our own congregation at home, etc. The ruling on Eid prayer is it's a communal prayer. It's not 50, 100 different places and thousands, if you take it as households, doing their own little Eid prayer. Okay, it needs to be that. If you look at the conditions of Juma, as we said, Eid prayer is built on the Juma prayer. The authorities need to be involved, meaning the Islamic authorities, the leadership of the Muslim community, who then make the prayer. And of course, now because we are not in a Muslim country per se, there's not one leadership. That every masjid has a leadership, and even that is a bit of a struggle sometimes, right? But sometimes they have council, or sometimes they do open Eids in the park, which are obviously not possible due to the pandemic. But in those circumstances, you go and join that congregation or any of the ones that are available, and you don't go and make your own. Right? So similarly, when it came to the pandemic and the situation now, we don't go make up our own congregations, our houses and our families, and I'm doing a congregation of Eid with my family. This isn't how Eid or Juma or these prayers are done. They are simply not performed if we can't come together to perform them. And there's no blemish or sin or loss, inshallah ta'ala, Instead, what you can do, and this was also circulated and is well known from a hadith of Abdullah bin Mas'ud, that the one who misses the Eid prayer, because it happened to people, right? It's happened to the Sahaba as well, then he should perform 4 rakats, 4 rakat of nafil, not 4 rakat Eid. He's missed the Eid prayer. He says it can't be made up. But he's missed it. So what does he do? Nothing. He can just do some nafil prayers. So do a nafil prayer of 4 rakat. And it's said in this to read Surah Sabbih Isma Rabbika al-A'la in the first rakat, والشمس وضحاها in the second rakat, والليل إذا يغشى in the third rakat, and Surah Ad-Duha والضحى والليل إذا يغشى والنهار إذا تجلى, the Surah Ad-Duha in the fourth rakat. That's it. Do the 4 rakats and nafil prayer. Any surah is okay. Surah Ikhlas 4 times is fine. You do 4 rakats nafil and go and join the celebrations. You missed your Eid prayer, you can do a nafil prayer of 4 rakats. And that was what was recommended for those who obviously weren't going to be able to make it to the masjid for Eid. There was a few masajid that did get together for Eid. I think maybe, I don't know whether it was all legal or well, with the guidelines or not, but some of it was possibly because you can have small prayer services. Even at that time, there was 1 or 2 people going into the masjid. It wasn't public, obviously, so it was restricted to staff or, imam and caretaker, etc., which is not a problem. They need to make sure everything's in order and the rights of the masjid are fulfilled, but there's no public services. So they could perform Eid, yes, they could have, because they don't have to close the doors to people. One of the conditions is you don't lock the building and stop people coming in, right? So if the doors are open, people can come in. They're not going to because they've been told not to. Then yeah, it can be technically valid in that situation as well. It will be valid now because the doors are open. You can go in. You have to obviously register. They're not going to prevent anybody. There'll be multiple congregations, etc. If people are prevented, then obviously it's not. But if you're prevented for a genuine reason, which is health and safety, then of course any time of the year or any prayer is allowed, because you can't endanger people's lives and risk things. And if that's what guidance is telling us, then we should follow that and not risk things on various levels. Risk is generally not a good thing. So you don't make up for a missed Eid prayer. Basically, you perform the Eid prayer. If you don't get the Eid prayer, you just pray nafils if you want. You don't have to. You just miss Eid prayer. Okay, we missed Eid prayer altogether. Not even the Imam. Nobody prayed it from the Muslims. What do we do now?
If there is a reason the Eid prayer cannot be performed on the proper day, then it may be delayed and performed on the following day.
Yeah, so for Eid al-Fitr, guys, we're talking about Eid al-Fitr right now. If you can't perform that prayer on the 1st of Shawwal due to a massive flood, due to a storm, due to various reasons, we're not going to come out, it's too risky, dangerous. And you can perform it on the 2nd of Shawwal, same time though, from after Fajr to before Zohar. You can, then you do it on the second day. Yeah. So we can delay Eid al-Fitr by 1 day and perform it on the 2nd of Shawwal. Eid is still on the 1st of Shawwal. It's just the prayer can be delayed. So we're still going to say Eid was the 1st of Shawwal, we celebrate it, but really we're going to do the prayer of Eid on the 2nd of Shawwal. And it would be a wajib if there was an excuse. If there's no excuse, you can't just delay to the next day. You got to pray on the 1st of Shawwal. Now we're going to go into the section on how Eid al-Adha, the big Eid as we call it, differs from small Eid in some of the recommendations and sunnahs, and of course the rulings of the Eid day itself. Bismillah.
The rulings of Eid al-Adha are the same as Eid al-Fitr, with the exception that for the Eid al-Adha, one is to delay eating until after the prayer.
Yeah. So in the Eid al-Fitr, you had something sweet because you're fasting all month, right? Now, when you start Eid al-Fitr, you don't want to start a fast. You want to break the fast, i.e. breakfast, and go to the prayer. Eid al-Adha, although you could have fasted the previous 9 days, and you should, is not built upon fasting. It's just built upon this auspicious time, very celebrated time of the blessed time of Hajj and related, blessings. So you eat before you go. So you don't eat before you go. You leave the eating till you come back. Sorry. Bismillah.
Other differences are that on the day of Eid al-Adha, one is to utter the takbir aloud in the street. And in the sermon of Eid al-Adha, the Imam is to teach the people about the sacrifice. And he's also informs them about the takbir of tashriq during the sermon.
Yeah, so good. So first of all, read the takbir loud. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Right now, in these days, and even tomorrow and on the day, if you're going to eat the prayer, out loud. Out loud as in don't shout your head off, just out loud as in loud enough to hear. People next to you can hear. You don't have to hear down the street. Allahu Akbar, like that. Allahu Akbar, like this sound right now means loud, right? It means out loud, as in you can hear each other. Allahu Akbar, La ilaha illallah, Allahu Akbar, walillahi alhamd. Whereas on Eid al-Fitr, you would have read it silently or quietly, some sound. Allahu Akbar, La ilaha illallah, Allahu Akbar, walillahi alhamd. So to yourself, in very low tone. Whereas Eid al-Adha, you read it out loud. And you teach about udhiyah, so people need to do their sacrifice. So please do your sacrifice. It can be done on the 10th, 11th, or 12th of the Hijjah. It has to be done after the Eid prayer. It needs to be a certain type of animal, a 1-year-old goat or lamb. And if you fulfill the criteria of basically having wealth above a certain amount, if you give zakat, you got to do udhiyah. Even if you don't give zakat, sometimes you have to give udhiyah as well. Then make sure you give the qurbani, as we call it, the udhiyah. It's a wajib. And also you're taught about, the imam should teach everyone about, and by that time everybody will be doing the takbirat anyway, which is the takbirat al-tashriq. The takbirat of tashriq have certain rulings, and I done with the prayers. After every prayer, inshallah, we're going to learn them very shortly, so I'm not going to talk about them right now. They're coming over the page on my book. But before we talk about them, there's just a couple more rulings regarding Eid al-Adha. One of them is mentioned, actually. It says you can delay this Eid prayer if there's an excuse for up to 3 days. So you can read it on the 10th, and the 11th, or the 12th. 3 days would be the 14th as well, wallahu alam. No, 13th, sorry, 11, 12, 13. Yep. If there's an excuse, not just for the sake of it, and then pray the prayer at that time. And then it says, Hassan,
if one tries to emulate those who are standing on Arafah, then it is not regarded as anything.
Yeah, so some traditions or some places start, and this is important that we don't start making up innovations like this. They start to imitate the people of Arafat. So right now we can't go on Hajj. Everyone gets together in Manchester or in a special place in Greater Manchester, right? And we say, right, we're going to imitate the people of Hajj. All of you come out, make du'as and spend all day praying. And this is what Eid, that's what Hajj Arafat is. All day dua, all day, you ask Allah, you turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as much as you can. You don't do that. We don't put ihram on and go and stand in the middle of nowhere on a hill. People did do this somewhat. That is nothing. That's not to be done, and is not something that's practiced. ليس بشيء لأنه اختراع في الدين. It's innovation in our religion, and it just causes problems, right? So this is probably, I wouldn't say this is like Arafat, what we do today. What probably reflects this today is, Hassan knows about this. It's probably called Chandrat, right?
Mhm.
This is probably what we need to avoid and stop, right? Because I'm not saying shopping is not allowed. I'm not saying, showing happiness is not allowed. But the whole malarkey that goes on within all of that, and there's much damage that occurs, and music and free mixing and lack of modesty and different ways of putting it. But it's a lot of haram that goes on within all of that as well. And that's not to celebrate Eid or show obedience to Allah. Eid is about obedience. It is about sacrifice and the struggle of the prophets Ibrahim alayhi salam and the Hajj and so forth. And to do that is contradictory and doesn't fit in with the Islamic values and morals. It's a very cultural thing, and different cultures have different ways of showing their joy and happiness and celebrating and having fun. But it has to be within the Islamic parameters. Doesn't mean you can't do anything. It just means you can't do certain things. You can have the shopping, you can have halal entertainment, you can have certain things, but it needs to be kept within the limits of the Sharia. So that would be something that we need to warn about. Now it's a very important section. I know we've gone on a bit today, but I think it's very important to talk about this last part of today's class, which is these takbirat at-tashriq. When are they? What are the conditions? Who has to say them? Bismillah, Hassan.
It is wajib to commence the takbir of tashriq after the dawn prayer on the day of Arafat, the 9th of Zulhijjah. And it is to be ended after the Asr prayer on the day of Eid al-Adha, 10th. It is to be pronounced once straight after every obligatory prayer, which is performed in a recommended group prayer. And the takbir is wajib upon the imam who resides in the city and his followers, even if they are travelers, slaves or females, according to Abu Hanifa.
Yeah, okay. So before we mention the other opinion, let's just explain that one. On the 9th of the Hijjah, which is tomorrow for us, if you're watching on it's Wednesday, it's Thursday, 30th of July or the 9th of Dhul Hijjah 1441 is Arafat. On the Fajr of this day, we'll start out Takbir. So tomorrow Fajr, we start out Takbir. Allahu Akbar, La ilaha illallah, Allahu Akbar, Walillahi alhamd, right? However, the first opinion given here is of Imam Abu Hanifa, which is a valid opinion, and our great Imam Rahmatullah alayh, who says that the takbir only has to be done if it's a prayer which is a congregational prayer, it's a fard prayer, everyone agrees to the fard, but it's congregational, it's done in a proper way by an imam who's a resident in a city, him and anybody who follows him, so it could be ladies, it could be children, it could be travelers, it doesn't matter about the followers, but if that imam and the congregation is a proper congregation with all the conditions in a city, then those people will have to say it's a wajib. So the ruling is it's a wajib, it's a yajibu takbiru tashriq on these people. How many prayers do they have to do? All of the 9th of Dhul Hijjah, so all of Thursday, and up to Asr prayer on Friday, which is the 10th of Dhul Hijjah, the day of Eid. So in total, 8 prayers, right? In total, they will be doing the takbirat al-tashriq for 8 prayers. That's the opinion of Imam Hanifa. If you read on Hassan, we'll go into the understanding and the opinion of Imam Abu Yusuf and Imam Muhammad ibn Hassan, rahmatullah alayhima.
Imam Muhammad and Abu Yusuf said that the takbir is wajib straight after every obligatory prayer upon anyone who prays the obligatory prayer, even if one prays it alone, is a traveller, or resides in a small village. They maintain that this is a wajib until after the Asr prayer on the 5th day, starting from the day of Arafah, and this is the adopted practice and the fatwa issued in accordance with this.
Exactly. So, although we've mentioned upon Hanifa ala ra'si wal ayn, of course, is even probably the stronger opinion because we believe he's a greater scholar, greater understanding. But fatwa is in accordance, and action is in accordance with that which not just one imam decided, but the whole school of thought, the whole ulama, what they understood to be the best practice in this regard. There's been differences, you'd find books that say otherwise, but the actual practice, majority, practical application is what the Sahiban, the 2 companions of Imam Hanifa said, is that from the same start time, which is Fajr on the 9th, Thursday, 30th of July, or the 9th of Dhul Hijjah, 1441, but we carry on for all of the 9th, all 5 prayers on the 10th, all 5 prayers on the 11th, which is Saturday, all 5 prayers on the 12th, which is Sunday, and then also on the 13th of Dhul Hijjah, which is the 5th day, we also perform the takbirat, so the Allahu Akbar, for 3 prayers, for Fajr, Dhuhr, and Asr. It says Asr on the 5th day, so 4 days full prayers. On the 5th day, you just do up to the Asr, including Asr. So you'll do a total of 20 and 3, 23 prayers. And it's not just on a congregational prayer and people that do that, it's on anybody, male, female, slave, free, congregation, individual, village, traveler, doesn't matter. Anybody and everybody who prays the 5 daily prayers will perform the takbirat of tashriq after each and every prayer for 23 prayers, commencing on Fajr of day of Arafah, all the way until the 13th of Dhul Hijjah, to the Asr, including the Asr prayer, 23 prayers. And that's a wajib, so we can't miss out on that. It's obviously rewarding and more rewarding to do that, inshallah ta'ala. Hassan, is any questions on that? Any clarity needed further?
No, that was pretty much exactly what I asked beforehand. I think there was a bit of a message going around that but it was off that first opinion, which now obviously I know now. But there was a message going on that it's only to be prayed by people who attend congregational prayers for them days.
Okay, right. So that was being mentioned, the opinion of Abu Hanifa, that you maybe, I don't know, sometimes I've not seen the message you're referring to. Sometimes it could be this: somebody presents the message and without clarifying that the fatwa is on the second opinion, there's 2 opinions, and people think, oh, well, that's for congregation, so don't worry about it, make it easier on people. People have different angles at looking at things and read differently into things. But it's very clear here, and it is very well known, to be honest. I've not heard any major difference, to be honest, but in these things you can understand differences are applicable. But really, for the 23 prayers from Fajr on the 9th to Asr on the 13th of Dhul Hijjah, after every prayer, whenever you pray, everyone, please remember to say Allahu Akbar, La ilaha illallah, Allahu Akbar, Walillahi alhamd. And to explain what do you do, how do you do it, even you finish your prayer, it's the fard prayer, so your 2 rakats Fajr, fard, When you give the salam, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. At this point right now, say Allahu Akbar, La ilaha illallah, Wallahu Akbar, Walillahi alhamd. To say it once is a wajib, and to say it 3 times is sunnah, is recommended. To repeat it more is recommended, right? But once at least is a wajib. And to be honest, the wajib is just to glorify Allah, to do takbir. So when you said Allahu Akbar kabira, Allahu Akbar, if you said that would fulfill the wajib. The full sentence is the sunnah sentence, which should be done, and it should also be done 3 times as well. This is the proper way. This is how we follow the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. This is the most beloved action to Allah. The way you practice something is by the sunnah, and not just a abridged version that just laziness kind of creeps in. And this mentions that there, so it's going to mention what you do, how we do that. Carry on if you like, Hassan.
There is no harm in reciting the takbir after the prayer of both Eids. The takbir is Allah is the greatest, Allah is the greatest. There is none worthy of worship except Allah. Allah is the greatest, Allah is the greatest. All praise be to Allah.
All praise be to Allah. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Jazakallah khairan. Please do share this for your friends and family to benefit for the day of Eid, to prepare, to celebrate. Jazakumullah khairan. And Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Eid Mubarak to everyone.